You turn a dial, and your apartment gets warm. That's it. That's the whole system. No planning, no risk, no death hanging over the decision. Your ancestors didn't have a dial. When temperatures dropped to levels that could kill an adult human in under an hour of direct exposure, survival wasn't a setting. It was a series of decisions made correctly every single day for months at a time. Snort's one mistake, one bad call about shelter, food, or fire, and an entire family group could be gone by morning. What they actually did to survive those winters is more ingenious and more brutal than almost anyone realizes. Let's start with the cold itself, because most people underestimate what deadliest winter actually meant 20,000 years ago during the peak of the last ice age. Average temperatures across much of Ice Age Europe regularly dropped to -20, -30 degrees Celsius. At those temperatures, exposed skin can develop frostbite in under 30 minutes. Hypothermia can set in even faster if there's wind or moisture involved. And this wasn't an occasional cold snap. This was the baseline reality for months, sometimes most of the year, for generations of humans living across what's now northern and central Europe. Archaeologist Olga Soffer, who spent decades studying Ice Age survival sites in Eastern Europe, found something that completely reshaped how researchers understood this period. At sites like Mezhirich in Ukraine, dated to roughly 15,000 years ago, archaeologists uncovered the remains of entire dwellings built almost completely out of mammoth bones. Not decoration, structural material. An estimated 149 mammoth bones and tusks, systematically arranged, formed the skeleton of a single shelter. Mammoth long bones stacked and interlocked to form load-bearing walls. Skulls used as foundation anchors. Tusks arched overhead like structural beams, likely covered with hides for insulation. Try picturing what that actually meant in practice. There were no trees on this landscape, no wood to build with. The ground was frozen solid for most of the year. So the group looked at the largest, heaviest, most abundant resource available to them, the remains of animals they had already hunted, and turned it into architecture. It took an enormous number of individual bones, meaning multiple mammoths worth of material, coordinated planning, and very likely, structures that were reused and rebuilt across multiple generations rather than built from scratch each winter. But bones alone don't keep you warm. Fire was the actual difference between life and death, and keeping one alive through an Arctic winter was far harder than it sounds. Wood, when available at all, had to be gathered, dried, and rationed with extreme care. In treeless regions, ancient humans burned bone itself, animal fat rendered down and used as fuel, a technique documented at multiple Ice Age sites through burn residue analysis on bone fragments. Fat-fueled fires burn hotter and longer than wood in many conditions, but they require a group that has successfully hunted enough large game to have fat to spare in the first place. Every single piece of the survival system was interconnected. Fail at hunting, and you don't just go hungry. You lose your ability to stay warm. This is where clothing technology becomes almost unbelievably sophisticated for a period most people picture as primitive. Archaeologist Olga Soffer's research into Ice Age textile impressions found evidence of woven fiber technology, cordage, netting, and possibly early basic weaving, dating back over 20,000 years, far earlier than researchers previously assumed such techniques existed. And at sites associated with Sungur, the same burial site we've talked about before, archaeologists found thousands of ivory beads arranged in patterns that mirror exactly where fitted, tailored clothing seems would have run across a human body. Not draped fur. Sewn, fitted garments cut and shaped to the body, similar in concept to modern cold weather gear, layered to trap warm air against the skin rather than just blocking wind. Sewing at that level of precision required bone needles, some found intact and remarkably fine, capable of producing tight, wind-resistant seams. A poorly made seam in extreme cold isn't a fashion problem. It's a gap that lets your body heat escape faster than you can produce it. The difference between a well-made and poorly made garment in these conditions could genuinely be the difference between surviving the season and not. Here's the part that gets skipped in most retellings of Ice Age life. Survival at this level wasn't primarily an individual skill. It was a coordination problem, solved socially, and the archaeological evidence increasingly supports the idea that group size and social cooperation mattered more to Ice Age survival than any single piece of technology. Anthropologist Robert Kelly's research into hunter-gatherer group dynamics suggests that Ice Age human bands likely maintained wider social networks specifically as insurance against catastrophic local failure. If your local group's hunt failed for an extended stretch during peak winter, and mammoth bones alone don't feed anyone, having reciprocal relationships with neighboring groups, sometimes located significant distances away, could mean the difference between starving and being able to travel to and rely on an ally group's surplus. Evidence for these long-distance networks shows up in the archaeological record as raw materials, certain stone tool materials, and shell ornaments found hundreds of kilometers from their geological source, suggesting extensive trade and social relationship networks stretching far beyond a single band's immediate territory. This means an individual family's survival through the deadliest part of an Ice Age winter often depended on relationships built and maintained during far less dangerous seasons, months or years in advance. Winter survival didn't start when the temperature dropped. It started with every earlier decision about who to trust, who to trade with, and who to remain connected to across distance. There's also a colder truth sitting underneath all of this, and it's worth naming directly. Not everyone survived. Skeletal evidence from Ice Age sites shows clear signs of nutritional stress, cold-related pathology, and infant mortality spiking specifically during the hardest winter months. Ice Age winter survival wasn't a guaranteed outcome achieved through cleverness alone. It was a genuine, ongoing gamble, weighted as favorably as possible through shelter, fire, clothing, and cooperation, but never fully removed from risk. Every single person who has ancestors from this period descends from someone who won that gamble, winter after winter, for thousands of consecutive years. Here's the part that should land differently once you actually sit with it. You have never once had to build a shelter out of the bones of animals you killed yourself, so your own clothing with a needle carved from bone, or calculate whether you had enough fat rendered down to keep a fire burning through a week of sub-zero temperatures. Every single one of those problems has already been solved for you, invisibly, by systems and infrastructure you never had to think about. But your body doesn't know that. Your circulatory system still aggressively redirects blood away from your extremities the instant it senses cold. The exact same survival response that once kept a hunter's core organs functioning while their fingers went numb gathering fuel in sub-zero wind. You still crave fat and warmth intensely in cold weather, an instinct that made perfect sense when fat meant fuel for both your body and your fire, and now mostly just shows up as wanting comfort food on a cold day. That instinct is still fully wired into you, running quietly in the background every single winter, even though the stakes attached to it disappeared generations ago. Somewhere in your nervous system is still a person who understands, at a level deeper than thought, that winter used to be able to kill you, and that staying warm was never just comfort. It was the entire difference between continuing to exist and not. If you want more stories like this, hit subscribe. It costs nothing, and it helps this kind of storytelling keep reaching people. See you in the next one.